Hello, my friend. Tonight we're going on a journey you probably didn't think you'd take. You're leaving your quiet, modern world behind and stepping into the hushed, incense-scented corridors of a Heian period Japanese court. A place of extraordinary beauty and equally extraordinary secrets. The year is roughly 1000 AD, and the capital of Heian-kyo, which you know today as Kyoto, is a city of intricate wooden palaces and gardens so perfect they seem painted. As you walk, you hear the distant chime of a bell from a nearby temple, the rustle of silk kimonos, and the quiet whisper of gossip carried on the breeze. The air here is thick with anticipation and hidden desires. You're not a samurai yet, nor are you a common farmer. For now, you are a ghost, a silent observer. In a world where every gesture, every brushstroke, and every poem is a carefully coded message. There's a particular kind of tension in this court, a mix of refined art and barely contained lust that feels completely foreign to you. You probably won't survive this world with your modern sensibilities intact, so consider yourself warned. The rules of love and sexuality here are a labyrinth of social conventions and secret passions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are and what time it is for you in the comments, and we can all share this moment together. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace, the very heart of the Heian court. This is a world where men and women are rarely seen by one another. They live behind screens and curtains, communicating through poetry, scrolls, and sometimes a barely glimpsed silhouette. It's a game of intellectual and emotional chess, a world where the power of a well-turned phrase or a perfectly selected kimono can win a lover more surely than any physical act. You watch as a young court lady, dressed in a magnificent 12-layer kimono called a junahito, composes a reply to a poem she received earlier in the day. The poem was left on a blossoming plum branch, a delicate symbol of the poet's intentions. This isn't just about pretty words. It's a test of her wit, her education, and her emotional intelligence. The wrong response could end the flirtation before it even begins. Her name is Seishonigan, a real historical figure, and the author of the Pillow Book, a fascinating collection of personal notes, observations, and lists. In its pages, she gives us a peek into the inner workings of this bizarre, romantic, and often cruel society. You read her words as if they were your own thoughts, feeling the cool paper under your fingers. She describes a lover's visit, not with explicit detail, but with what happens the morning after. She writes about the delightful moment when a lover, having spent the night, must leave quietly before dawn, his departure an act of refined melancholy. She doesn't need to tell you what happened in the night itself. The atmosphere, the description of his lingering scent, and the rustle of his clothes makes it perfectly clear. What's truly striking is the power of language in this world. A single misplaced word could ruin a reputation. A perfectly crafted poem, on the other hand, could earn you a lover's favor or a promotion at court. These interactions were almost entirely cerebral, a thrilling dance of innuendo and suggestion. You see how a woman's fan, held just so to hide her face, could convey a world of meaning. It's a game of shadows and whispers and sex. It was a part of this dance, a physical culmination of a long, poetic courtship, but it was almost never the main event. It was a secret, whispered thing, rarely described in the open. The poetry and the art were what mattered most. It's a world, away from a modern dating app, where a person's face and a short bio are all you have to go on. Here, a person's intellect and artistry were their most potent aphrodisiacs. Historians still argue whether, say, Shonagon's writings are a factual account of her life or a semi-fictionalized ideal of courtly love. Maybe she's just giving us a polished version of events, a sort of ancient, pre-social media highlight reel. We'll probably never know for sure. What we do know is that her writing gives us a window into a culture where the art of seduction was as revered as the art of war. She talks about the importance of a man's clothing, the way he smelled, and the sound of his voice. She even has a list of things that lose by being painted, and you can almost feel her witty sarcasm. The pillow books themselves were not just diaries, they were collections of thoughts, observations, and literary musings. Some believe they were literally kept in the pillow box or beside the pillow, a private space for a woman's innermost thoughts. This tiny peek behind the curtain is one of the few ways we can truly understand the emotional lives of these court ladies, who were otherwise hidden from the public eye. And so, as dawn breaks, you see the courtier from the night before slip away, his silk robes disappearing into the morning mist. He leaves behind a poem, a fresh sprig of plum blossom, and a memory. The lady smiles to herself, her face hidden behind her fan, and you understand that in this world the true passion lay not in the act itself, but in the lingering aftertaste of poetry and the promise of a clandestine return. The delicate, poetic world of the Heian court fades like a morning mist, and you are propelled forward in time. The year is now the 17th century, the Edo period, and the air is no longer filled with the scent of plum blossoms and ink. Instead, you smell the briny tang of the sea and the smoky scent of charcoal fires. You stand on a crowded street in Edo, a city humming with commerce, ambition, and a different kind of pleasure. This is the Yoshiwara, the pleasure quarter, and it's a world meticulously crafted for desire. As you walk down the main street, the Nakancho, you're surrounded by a vibrant tapestry of sights and sounds. There are lanterns glowing with soft light, cherry trees in full bloom, and the chatter of men from every walk of life, merchants, samurai, artists, all here for the same purpose. Tonight, you're not a silent observer in a palace. You're a curious visitor, walking into one of the grandest establishments. The courtesans here aren't the secretive, poetry-writing ladies of the past. They are icons of fashion, art, and wit, and they hold a power all their own. The most revered of these women were the Oiran, and tonight, you're here to witness the bizarre and theatrical ceremony of their procession. The Oiran do Cho. You find a spot along the street, among a throng of onlookers. The crowd hushes as the procession begins. The Oiran doesn't just walk, she glides. She wears a towering wig and an impossibly heavy kimono, often weighing more than 40 pounds. Her face is a porcelain mask of white makeup, her lips a tiny, perfect red bloom. What truly captures your attention are her shoes, enormous, black lacquer clogs called Sanjo Geta, which force her to walk with a distinct, slow, figure-eight pattern. It's a walk of immense grace and power, a performance in itself. She doesn't look at the crowd. Her gaze is fixed forward, conveying a sense of untouchable dignity. This isn't just a walk, it's a spectacle of status. To become an Oiran, a woman had to be a master of the arts. She needed to be a poet, a musician, a calligrapher, and a conversationalist par excellence. A man couldn't simply walk in and buy her company. He had to be chosen. The process was a ritual of 3 encounters, known as the Satlenkai. The first time, he would be treated with a cool indifference, a test of his patience and worth. The Oiran would sit far from him, barely acknowledging his presence. The second time, if he passed the first test, she might sit a little closer. Only on the third visit, after proving his seriousness and wealth, would she finally accept him as a patron. It was a game of courtship and control, a fascinating display of power dynamics, where the courtesan, despite her circumstances, held the upper hand. Historians still argue whether the elaborate and demanding rituals surrounding the Oiran were a genuine reflection of their power, or simply a theatrical means to justify their exorbitant fees. Was it a way for them to reclaim some agency in a world that had taken it from them, or was it just another layer of the luxurious illusion? You notice the smaller details that speak volumes. Her entourage includes young apprentice courtesans, called camero, and a male servant to carry her belongings. It's a small court, a traveling palace of sorts. You watch as she passes, and you can't help but be struck by the contradiction. Here is a woman who, on one hand, is a captive in this district, yet, on the other, she is a celebrity, a trendsetter, a figure of cultural importance. The woodblock prince of the day, known as Ukiyo-e, often featured the most famous Oiran, cementing their status as fashion icons and objects of fascination. It's a bizarre system, a whole city within a city, designed to contain and control desire. The Yoshiwara was a legal, walled-off district, a fantasy land where social norms could be temporarily set aside. Samurai were forbidden from carrying their swords inside, a symbolic disarmament that leveled the playing field, at least in theory, and created a sense of temporary freedom. The Oiran herself was a walking contradiction, a woman who lived outside the norms of respectable society, yet was also a master of the most refined arts and an arbiter of taste. It's an odd sort of liberation, a gilded cage where a woman could be a star, but never truly free. You think of a pop star today, celebrated and adored, but living a life constantly under a microscope and subject to the whims of the public. The Oiran's life, for all its glamour, had a similar weight as the procession passes and the chatter of the crowd resumes. You get a strange sense of the city itself. The samurai and merchants, who held such a rigid hierarchy outside these walls, were all on equal footing here, united by a common desire. The Yoshiwara was a pressure valve for a highly stratified society. It was a place where fantasies could be indulged, but only for a price, and only according to the very strict rules of the game. The Oiran Docho was the perfect illustration of that, a spectacle of unreachable beauty and grace, a reminder that some things, even in this city of earthly delights, were still a world away. The dazzling lights of the Yoshiwara dim behind you, and you're transported once more. The soundscape changes from the clamor of the city to the rustling of bamboo in a quiet mountain estate. You're now in a samurai lord's domain, a place of political maneuvering and rigid hierarchy, a world where love and desire are often secondary to duty and power. Here, beneath the polished wooden floors and behind the sliding paper doors, you catch a glimpse of a relationship that was both commonplace and deeply misunderstood, that of the Wakashu, or young male companion, and the samurai who patronized him. It's an incredibly quiet place, this estate. You hear the soft sweep of a broom over stones in the garden, the distant hum of a bee. You watch as a young man, no older than 16, meticulously polishes a sword. He moves with a quiet grace, his face a study in concentration. He is a Wakashu, a male concubine, and his relationship with the lord of the house is one of the most intriguing and culturally specific aspects of this era. This wasn't a secret, shameful affair. It was an open, accepted, and even celebrated part of samurai culture, known as Shudō, or the way of the youth. The young man is not just a companion, he is also an apprentice. He is learning the way of the samurai, receiving an education in poetry, calligraphy, and martial arts from his patron. The relationship was often seen as a form of mentorship, a way for the older samurai to pass on his values and knowledge to the next generation. A sort of teacher-student bond that was also deeply romantic and sexual. It was believed that a young man's emotional purity and loyalty could inspire an older warrior to be more virtuous, more brave, and more dedicated to his duties. This practice, in many ways, mirrored the heterosexual relationships of the time, where a lord might take a younger, less powerful woman as a concubine. Here, the power dynamic was similar, but the emotional and spiritual components were given much more weight. You are watching the lord of the house, a grizzled veteran of many battles, observing the Wakashu from a distance. There's an undeniable tenderness in his gaze, but also an expectation. This is not a relationship of equals. The Wakashu is expected to be loyal, obedient, and completely devoted to his master. In return, he receives protection, an education, and a place in a powerful household. It's a transaction, yes, but one steeped in a specific cultural philosophy. Historians still argue whether these relationships were truly based on spiritual love and mentorship, or if they were, at their core, simply a reflection of the samurai's power and their ability to take whatever they desired, regardless of gender. The life of a Wakashu was not without its dangers. The intense loyalty expected could lead to tragic outcomes. Stories abound of Wakashu who, upon their master's death, would commit suicide to follow him into the afterlife, a final act of devotion. That was seen as the ultimate expression of Shudō. In the eyes of society, this was not a tragic end, but a beautiful and honorable one. There was a popular saying that to be a true samurai, a man must know both the pain of the battlefield and the sorrow of losing a young male lover. You find yourself contrasting this with other ancient cultures you've learnt about, unlike the male concubines in ancient Greece who often faced social stigma and a lack of legal rights. The relationship here was an accepted and even revered part of the dominant warrior class, afforded a unique status and philosophical justification. It was a respected tradition, not a marginalized practice. As the Wakashu finishes polishing the sword, he presents it to his master, who accepts it with a slight, almost imperceptible nod of appreciation. This quiet moment holds more meaning than 1,000 words. It speaks of a bond forged in loyalty, duty, and a love that was defined by the unique, often brutal, world of the samurai. It was a love that was supposed to make a warrior better, stronger, and more virtuous, even if it meant sacrificing his own life for it. You can almost feel the weight of this expectation in the air, a heavy and silent pressure that hangs over the beautiful, manicured gardens. The quiet intensity of the samurai estate recedes, and you are led by an unseen force to a new setting. The year is still the Edo period, but the atmosphere is completely different. The air here smells of old books and incense, and the sound is the low, rhythmic chanting of monks. You are standing in a Buddhist temple, a place of spiritual contemplation and aesthetic beauty. Here, among the peaceful gardens and gilded statues, you are about to uncover another layer of feudal Japan's complex and often bizarre sexual practices. The relationships between samurai and young temple acolytes, known as Chigo. These were not just boys studying to become monks. They were often the sons of noble families, sent to the temple to receive a prestigious education in letters, arts, and religion. They were known for their beauty, and their youthful innocence was seen as a divine attribute. Their lives were a blend of spiritual discipline and worldly refinement. They learned to compose poetry, perform elegant dances, and master the art of conversation. They were, in essence, the very personification of a fleeting, ethereal beauty. This spiritual and aesthetic appeal made them objects of adoration, not just for the monks who mentored them, but also for the samurai who visited the temples. For a samurai whose life was one of constant discipline, violence, and the cold reality of death, the Chigo represented a kind of pure, untainted beauty and a respite from the harshness of their world. These relationships, much like those with the Wakashu, were seen through a spiritual lens. A samurai's affection for a Chigo was often interpreted as a quest for spiritual purity and enlightenment. The love was considered a kind of a path to the divine, an earthly expression of a deeper spiritual yearning. You are watching a samurai, his face scarred and his posture rigid from years of battle, sitting in a quiet room with a young Chigo. The boy is no older than 12, his face a perfect oval, his hair tied in a youthful knot. He is performing a graceful dance for the samurai, his movements as fluid as water. The dance is not explicitly sexual, it's an art form, a moving poem. But in the hushed silence of the temple room, you can feel the undertones. This is a ritual of aesthetic appreciation that blurs the lines between art, love, and spiritual devotion. Historians still argue whether the spiritual justifications for these relationships were a genuine belief system or a convenient excuse to indulge in desires that might otherwise have been frowned upon. Was it a sacred love, or simply a power dynamic disguised by religious piety? We can't know for certain, but we do know that these relationships were a recognized and documented part of the era. The very concept of a Chigo had a double meaning, referring both to a beautiful temple boy and to an object of desire. This practice stands in stark contrast to the rigid class structures of the time. While the samurai was the epitome of power and privilege, the Chigo, despite his noble birth, was still a boy, a servant of the temple. The power dynamic was clear, yet the affection could be genuine. It was a bizarre mingling of the sacred and the profane, a unique cultural phenomenon that could only have existed in a world that saw no contradiction between a warrior's brutal duty and his quest for spiritual enlightenment. The delicate flirtations and poetry you witnessed earlier in the Heian court seem like a world away from the solemn, spiritual undertones here. The Heian world was about intellectual play and refined artifice, while this world is about finding a momentary beauty and purity in a life of hardship and violence. It's a testament to the sheer diversity of sexual and romantic relationships. In feudal Japan, this was a society that had a distinct and accepted space for same-sex love. A far cry from the modern world's often tumultuous history with the same topic as the Chigo finishes his dance and bows. The samurai does not clap. He simply sits in silent contemplation, his eyes closed. The moment is over, but the feeling lingers. The beauty of the boy, the solemnity of the temple, and the warrior's silent reverence all combine into a complex picture of a society where love and desire were not always what they seemed, and could be found in the most unexpected of places. It's a reminder that beneath the surface of every culture, there are private worlds and personal stories that defy our simple labels and expectations. The solemnity of the temple and the quiet grace of the Chigo dissolve into the bustling, vibrant energy of a new setting. You're now in a workshop in Edo, a place where the air smells of rice paste and fresh ink, and the rhythmic thump of a baron on a woodblock provides a steady heartbeat for the city. You've left the spiritual and the secretive behind and entered the world of the commercially produced and widely consumed. This is the world of Ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world, and we're here to talk about its most popular and most explicit genre, Shunga, or spring pictures. These weren't just dirty drawings. Shunga were highly detailed, explicit erotic woodblock prints, but they were also a major part of the cultural landscape. They were produced by the very same master artists you know today, the ones whose work hangs in museums. Can you imagine? The guy who gave us the Great Wave off Kanagawa was also busy sketching incredibly detailed and often hilarious erotic scenes. This mainstream historical fact is a testament to how integrated and accepted this genre was. Shunga were not a fringe activity. They were a booming business. You're watching a master printer, his face a study in concentration, as he applies a thin layer of black ink to a meticulously carved woodblock. The level of detail is astonishing. Every line, every expression, every fold of fabric is rendered with incredible precision. But what truly sets Shunga apart is the humor. They often exaggerated features to almost comical proportions, and they showed people from every walk of life. A samurai and a courtesan, a merchant and his wife, even sometimes a monk and a nun. Everyone, it seemed, was fair game for the artist's eye. This democratic approach to desire was a delightful and unexpected twist in a society so obsessed with rigid social classes. A quirky, almost unbelievable tidbit about Shunga is that they were considered good luck charms. People would carry them in their pockets or store them in their homes, believing they would protect them from disaster, especially fire. In a city like Edo, where entire neighborhoods could burn down in a matter of hours, having a tiny erotic drawing in your purse was seen as a perfectly rational way to protect your property. The idea was that the passionate energy of the print would distract the fire spirits and make them too flustered to cause any real damage. It's a beautifully human and utterly ridiculous superstition, isn't it? Don't worry, darling. I've got my fire prevention Shunga right here. Historians still argue whether the widespread popularity of Shunga truly reflected a more open and liberal attitude toward sexuality in Edo, Japan, or if it was simply a form of escapism. Were people genuinely more comfortable with their sexuality? Or was this just a fantasy world they could enter through art, a safe space to indulge in desires that were too taboo for their everyday lives? The answer is probably somewhere in the middle, a complex blend of both, which is what makes these prints so fascinating. As you look at the finished print, drying on a rack, you realize that Shunga were a form of storytelling. The artist wasn't just drawing an explicit scene. They were telling a story about love, desire, and human nature. The prints often included poetry and witty captions, adding another layer of meaning. They were a secret language passed from hand to hand, a way for people to connect with each other on a deeply personal level, beyond the constraints of social class or rigid etiquette. It was a world where a samurai and a merchant could both find a common ground, not on the battlefield or in the marketplace, but in the simple, universal language of desire. The vivid, exaggerated world of the woodblock prints begins to fade from your mind, and the clamor of the artisan's workshop dissolves into a profound and intentional silence. The air, once thick with the smell of ink, now carries the earthy, bitter scent of powdered green tea. You find yourself kneeling on a tatami mat in a small, minimalist room. This is a chashitsu, a tea house, a place of peace, reflection, and absolute ritual. The only sounds are the soft sloshing of water from a bamboo ladle, the gentle scrape of a whisk against a ceramic bowl, and the distant, almost imperceptible sound of a single cricket. This is the world of the chanayu, the Japanese tea ceremony. It's a practice of mindfulness and aesthetic appreciation that seems to exist in direct opposition to the hedonistic pleasures of the floating world. Every movement is prescribed, every utensil is carefully chosen, and every word is weighed. The host cleans the bowl with a meticulous grace. The guest accepts it with a silent bow. It is a dance of respect and discipline. A place where a samurai could set aside his sword and find a moment of zen-like calm. It's the ultimate expression of harmony, reverence, purity, and tranquility. But you, a quiet observer, begin to notice something else beneath this surface of serenity. The tea house, with its secluded location in a garden and its strict rules of privacy, also served another, more clandestine purpose. It was the perfect place for a hidden rendezvous in a society where public displays of affection were unthinkable and private homes were often full of watchful eyes. The neutral, sacred space of the tea house offered a rare and precious opportunity for private conversation and romantic intrigue. You are watching a samurai and a beautiful young woman, a courtesan perhaps, or a merchant's wife, kneeling across from each other. They say nothing explicitly romantic. Their conversation is about the beauty of the teacup, the quality of the matcha, the passing of the seasons. But you, with your uncanny ability to see into the past, can feel the subtext. The way the woman's eyes linger on his for just a moment too long. The way the samurai's hand trembles slightly as he accepts the bowl. Every polite gesture, every piece of formal dialogue seems to carry a double meaning, a second, secret conversation taking place just beneath the surface. It is a game of exquisite subtlety, and the tea ceremony itself is the perfect cover. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this period is how specific, poetic, or classical phrases, when uttered during the ceremony, could signal a hidden meaning. A host might quote a particular line from a famous poem about waiting for a lover, and the guest would understand it as an invitation to meet later in the garden. This was a secret language spoken in whispers and polite smiles. It was all so very refined, wasn't it? A polite refusal to a romantic advance would simply be a well-crafted, equally poetic response about the fleeting nature of a flower, for example. The entire dance of courtship could take place without a single explicit word. Historians still argue whether the tea ceremony was primarily a spiritual practice with romantic undertones, or if the romantic aspect was a much more common and deliberate part of its function. Was it a sacred love, or just a clever exploitation of a sacred space? Did the very formality and rigidity of the ceremony make the hidden moments of passion even more thrilling? There's a certain irony to it all, a deep, beautiful sarcasm in the idea that the most profound expressions of human desire could be found not in a bustling pleasure quarter, but in a room built for quiet contemplation. As the ceremony comes to a close and the last drops of tea are finished, the guests rise with a final, formal bow. But as they do, their hands brush for a fleeting, intentional second. It's an act so small, so quick, that no one else would have noticed it, but you did. And you understand that in this world of strict etiquette and hidden lives, these moments were everything. It's a reminder that beneath the surface of every culture, There are private worlds and personal stories that defy our simple labels and expectations, and that a single touch can carry a universe of meaning. The whispers and subtle touches of the tea house vanish, replaced by the heavy, echoing silence of a daimyo's castle. The air here doesn't smell of tea or ink, but of polished wood and a cold, almost metallic sense of power. You stand in a grand hall, a space built for displays of wealth and authority, not for intimacy. Tonight, you're not an observer of a secret tryst, but a silent guest at a wedding, the kind of wedding that has nothing to do with love. This is the world of arranged marriages, the cold, hard reality that underpinned the entire feudal power structure for the ruling class. From the shogun down to the smallest daimyo, marriage was a political contract. It was a tool for forging alliances, securing land, and ensuring military strength. A woman was a valuable commodity, a living embodiment of her family's power, and her hand in marriage was a strategic asset to be traded. Love, romance, and personal affection were not part of the equation. You are watching a young woman, no more than 17, being dressed for her ceremony. She is the daughter of a powerful lord, and today she is being married to a man she has never met, the son of her father's most important political ally. Her face, a mask of heavy white makeup, is devoid of expression. Her rich, ceremonial kimono is so heavy and restrictive that she can barely move. She isn't a blushing bride. She's a precious gift, a human treaty of peace and a promise of future loyalty. Much like in ancient Egyptian weddings, which were social arrangements focused on establishing a stable household, marriage in feudal Japan's upper echelons was primarily a pragmatic affair. The union was formalized not by a religious ceremony, but by a series of highly ritualized social acts. The most important of these was the Sansankudo, the 339 exchange of sake cups. The bride and groom would take turns sipping sake from 3 different cups, each sip imbued with symbolic meaning. It was an act of unity, of shared destiny, but in this room it feels more like a formal handshake, a cold agreement sealed with rice wine. A quirky, almost unsettling detail of the ceremony is the role of the wife's attendant, or koshima. Her job was to serve her mistress, but she was also expected to share the bed with the new husband on the first night of the marriage. The practice was a strange mix of tradition and pragmatism, a way to ensure the husband's potency and to test his character, with the koshimoto acting as a surrogate. It was a bizarre tradition that speaks volumes about the complete lack of romance and the transactional nature of these unions. It was not a night of intimacy between 2 people, but a public, though hidden, performance to ensure the future of 2 powerful families. Historians still argue whether the women in these marriages had any personal agency at all. Were they simply silent pawns in a game of political chess, or did they find ways to exert influence and build a fulfilling life within the confines of their role? We see glimpses in later writings of women who became powerful managers of their new households, effectively running the estate and wielding significant influence. So while the wedding itself may have been devoid of love, the marriage that followed wasn't always devoid of power. As the ceremony concludes, the young woman is led to her new home, her new life. There are no words of love exchanged, no promises of affection. She is simply handed over, a living symbol of a new alliance. The cheers of the guests are a celebration not of a new couple's happiness, but of a political victory. And as you watch her go, you can't help but feel the weight of this bizarre tradition. In a world where love was a secret and whispered thing, marriage, the supposed pinnacle of human connection, was often its coldest, most calculated form. The heavy doors of the castle close, and the memory of the wedding ceremony fades. The cheers of the guests are gone, and in their place is the sound of a new household, a world of quiet but constant activity. You are now inside the home of the daimyo, watching the life of the young woman you saw get married. The formal gown has been replaced by the everyday kimono of a samurai wife, but the weight of her duty is just as heavy. She is the mistress of a large estate, and her life, you quickly learn, is a delicate and complex balancing act. Her new husband, the daimyo, spends his days in military training, political meetings, and managing his lands. But the household, the very heart of his domain, is her exclusive responsibility. A mainstream historical fact is that a samurai wife's primary, and often most powerful, duty was as a chief administrator. She oversaw the servants, managed the finances, handled supplies, and organized all domestic affairs. The smooth, efficient running of the household was a direct reflection of her husband's honor and status. You watch her calmly giving orders, her voice soft but firm, her posture unwavering. It's a job that requires not just intelligence, but political savvy, as she often mediates disputes among staff and manages the family's social relationships. But there is one duty that eclipses all others, a silent and unspoken pressure that hangs over her every action, the need to produce an heir. The survival of the family name, the continuation of the line, and the stability of the entire domain rest on her ability to bear a son. You can see it in the way she looks at her husband, in the way she smiles for the sake of the family, and in the quiet prayers she offers at the family shrine. The pressure is immense. And you know, because you are a quiet observer of this world, that failure to produce a male heir is a major cause for a husband to take a concubine or, in rare and devastating cases, to divorce her. It's a bizarre tradition, isn't it? A woman's entire worth, her love, her intelligence, her skill as a manager, all of it could be overshadowed by the biological luck of the draw. A quirky, almost unbelievable tidbit is that while a samurai wife's life was primarily domestic, she was also expected to be prepared for war. Many noble women receive training in martial arts, specifically in the use of the naginata, a long-bladed pole weapon. This wasn't for her to go to battle, oh no. This training was for her to defend the home, her children, and the family honor should the castle be attacked while her husband was away. So, as she calmly oversees the accounts and arranges the servants' tasks, you can see in her posture a quiet, steel-like strength, the potential of a warrior ready to defend her home with her life. It's a fascinating and deeply contradictory duality. Historians still argue whether the role of household manager granted these women genuine power, or if it was simply a more elaborate form of confinement. Was their administrative authority a real form of influence, allowing them to shape the household's destiny, or were they just highly skilled servants for a patriarchal system? Did they have any voice at all in the larger political decisions that their husbands made, or were they simply a reflection of their husband's will? The lines are so blurred, you can feel the tension in the air, and so, as the day winds down and the samurai wife prepares for bed, her face finally free of the social masks she wears, you get a sense of her silent strength. She is not a pawn. Not entirely. She is a woman who, in a world of rigid duty and expectation, has found a way to not just survive, but to run her world with an iron will. She is the silent engine of the samurai house, a figure of incredible responsibility and quiet power, a woman whose true life lies in the unseen and the unspoken. The heavy atmosphere of the samurai household lifts, and you are swept away into a world of light, music, and exquisite artifice. The quiet rustle of a samurai wife's kimono is replaced by the soft shuffle of geta on a polished wooden street, and the air, once thick with quiet duty, now smells of jasmine, expensive sake, and fine perfumes. You are in a Hanamachi, a geisha district, a place where art, wit, and beauty are the currency of the night. Tonight, you're not an observer of a secret political marriage or a clandestine tea ceremony. You're watching a different kind of ritual, one performed by women who are masters of their craft. You see them walking, their faces a perfect mask of white powder, their kimonos a breathtaking swirl of silk and color. These are the geisha, and their world, you quickly learn, is a fascinating blend of public performance and private sacrifice. Mainstream, historical fact that often gets lost in translation, is that a geisha was not a courtesan. This is a crucial distinction. The courtesans of the Yoshiwara, like the high-ranking Oiran we saw earlier, were professional sex workers. A geisha, however, was a professional entertainer, an artist. She was trained from a young age in the traditional Japanese arts, music, dance, poetry, and the art of conversation. Her job was to provide intellectual and emotional companionship, to be the perfect hostess who could make a powerful man forget his troubles, not in a bedroom, but in a tea room or banquet hall. She was a living piece of art, but in a world built on the illusion of intimacy, love itself was often forbidden. The unspoken rule was that a geisha could not fall in love with her clients. Her purpose was to be a mirror, reflecting a man's desires back at him, but never to truly share them. This created a strange and powerful tension. A geisha's greatest skill was to make a man feel like he was the only person in the world, to make him feel a deep, personal connection. Yet, she had to do this without letting her own heart get involved. She was a master of the performance of affection, but forbidden from the real thing. It's a bit like a Shakespearean actor who has to play a tragic lover every night but is not allowed to feel a single tear for his co-star. The performance had to be perfect, even if the emotions were entirely fabricated. A quirky and frankly bizarre historical tidbit is the Mizwaj ceremony, a practice that, while later banned, was a significant part of a geisha's early career. The ceremony involved a wealthy patron paying a large sum to deflower a young geisha, a ritual that marked her transition to a full-fledged geisha. It was a formal, public sign that she was now a woman of status, and the money earned would go to pay off the debts of her training. It's a strange contradiction, isn't it? A woman whose job was to be an artist and entertainer had to go through a deeply intimate and transactional ritual to be considered a master of her craft. It highlights the deeply complex and often conflicting forces at play in her life. Historians still argue whether the forbidden love was a genuine restriction or simply part of the romantic mystique of the geisha. How often were these rules actually broken? Did geisha and their patrons secretly fall in love? And if so, what were the consequences? The stories and legends suggest that true love, while rare, was not impossible, and a geisha might find a patron who would become her dana or long-term financial supporter, a relationship that could sometimes lead to a deeper, more romantic bond. But it was always a difficult path, fraught with social judgment and economic uncertainty. As the music of a shamisen drifts through the night, you see a geisha bowing to a client, her smile a perfect professional curve. She thanks him for his company, but there is no lingering look, no whispered promise. Her performance is over, and the stage is now empty. You realize that the greatest and most tragic performance of her life may have been the one she gave every single day, the performance of a heart that was not allowed to feel. The delicate music of the geisha's shamisen fades into the hum of a larger, more complex system. You're no longer in a small, intimate room, but standing at the very gates of a sprawling, walled-off district. The air here, while still thick with the scent of perfume and sake, also carries a faint, institutional smell of officialdom. This is the Yoshiwara in its entirety, a world not just of pleasure, but of meticulous social engineering. You realize the women and men we've observed were all players in a much larger, carefully controlled game. This isn't just a part of the city. It's a city within a city, a contained and heavily regulated area designed for a single purpose. The shogunate, the military government, established these licensed pleasure quarters as a brilliant, if slightly sinister, form of social control. By containing all the vista prostitution, the gambling, the drunkenness, a single, walled-off area, they could monitor it, tax it, and, most importantly, prevent it from seeping out and contaminating the rest of society. It was the perfect pressure release valve for a society of rigid rules and hierarchies. You stand at the main gate. The human, a formidable structure that looks more like a fortress entrance than a doorway to a good time. A mainstream historical fact about the Yoshiwara is that once the gates closed at night, no one could enter or leave until morning. This created a peculiar sense of being in a liminal space, a separate world with its own rules and its own time. If a merchant got too caught up in the festivities and missed the final bell, he was trapped inside until dawn. It was a charming way to encourage people to spend more money, wasn't it? The district's layout was designed to keep patrons inside and confuse them if they tried to leave. The streets were deliberately curved and confusing, and the most expensive houses were located deep within the complex. It was a maze of desire, designed to part a man from his money as efficiently as possible. But there was a bizarre social leveling that occurred within these walls. Remember how a samurai was the epitome of power and privilege. Here, all samurai had to leave their swords at the main gate. This act of disarmament created a unique, if temporary, social equality. A wealthy merchant, a powerful samurai, and a common laborer were all, in theory, on the same footing here, united by a common desire and an inability to carry a weapon. A quirky, almost unbelievable, tidbit is the strict return bell curfew. The ringing of this bell at night was not just a signal to close the gates. It was also a signal for the patrons to settle their tabs and for the courtesans and geisha to end their evenings. The whole district operated on a precise, almost clockwork schedule, which seems completely at odds with the idea of a chaotic, decadent party district. The very act of chasing pleasure was bound by an intricate web of rules, schedules, and social expectations, making it perhaps the most organized form of indulgence in the world. Historians still argue about the true effectiveness of this system. Did the Yoshiwara and other licensed quarters genuinely serve to contain and control social ills, or did they simply make them more organized, more accessible, and more profitable for the shogunate? Was it a system of moral preservation or a system of cynical financial exploitation? The answer, like so many things in this strange world, is probably both. As you look at the lanterns glowing on the polished streets, you get a sense of the sheer, brilliant audacity of the entire system. A society so obsessed with order and control found a way to contain its most primal urges. to build a beautiful, glittering cage around the very things that threatened its stability. It was a place of dreams and of secrets, of art and of commerce, all bound together by the invisible threads of power and regulation. And as the final bell rings out, you know that for all the freedom of a night in the floating world, the walls were always there, a constant reminder of the order that lay just outside. The walls of the Yoshiwara dissolve, and the finality of the return bell's chime gives way to an unsettling quiet. You're back on the streets of Edo, but the feeling of freedom has evaporated. Now there's a new presence, an unseen weight, an invisible gaze that follows you. It's the feeling of being watched, not by a curious neighbor, but by a system. You've entered the world of the Metsuke, the secret police, and their purview was not just political dissent, but the deepest, most private corners of your life. This was an era of intense social control, and the Tokugawa shogunate was brilliant at it. The pleasure quarters were one part of the system, a physical cage for vice, but the Metsuke were another, an invisible net cast over the entire country. Their official role was to monitor the conduct of government officials, from the highest-ranking lords to the lowest-level bureaucrats. They were the eyes and ears of the shogun, ensuring loyalty and preventing conspiracies before they could even begin. But their job went much further than that. Their mandate included the moral conduct of the general populace, and that's where things get really bizarre. This wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about enforcing a rigid moral code that extended into the private lives of ordinary people. You can almost feel it in the air, a sense of tension in every hushed conversation. Adultery was considered a grave sin, a betrayal not just of a spouse, but of the social order itself, a forbidden relationship between a person of a higher class and a person of a lower one could be seen as a threat to the entire caste system. The Metsuke and their extensive network of informants were the invisible enforcers of these private, intimate laws. You were watching a scene unfold in a quiet neighborhood. A woman is talking to a man who is not her husband. They are not touching, not even smiling much. It's just a simple, innocuous conversation in the street. But you can feel the tension. They are being watched from a nearby window by an elderly woman, a quiet member of the community. She is an informant. In this world, a person's private life was a public concern, and loyalty to the shogunate could be demonstrated by reporting on your neighbor's transgressions. A quirky and deeply unsettling tidbit is that this system of spying created a pervasive atmosphere of suspicion where no one could be truly trusted, not even family. It turned an entire society into a collection of potential spies, all watching each other. A mainstream historical fact is that the Metsuke's power was considerable, but their existence was also an open secret. Everyone knew they were there, and this knowledge was often as effective a deterrent as any punishment. It was a clever psychological tool, a government's way of saying, we don't need to be everywhere. You just have to believe we might be. It was a form of control that existed in the mind as much as it did in the real world. Historians still argue about the true effectiveness of the Metsuke in controlling private morality. Were they truly able to stamp out illicit affairs and forbidden loves, or did they simply drive these things deeper into the shadows, making them more secretive and, perhaps, more thrilling? It's a testament to the stubbornness of human nature, isn't it? The more a government tries to legislate love and desire, the more creative people become in their pursuit of it. This whole system of surveillance, of walls and spies, was a bizarre and elaborate attempt to control the one thing that has always been uncontrollable, the human heart, and as you fade from this world of quiet suspicion, you wonder if they ever truly succeeded. The pervasive, unsettling quiet of the secret police fades, and in its place, the air fills with music, laughter, and the rich scent of expensive silks. You are now in a grand banquet hall, a place of power and aristocracy, but the entertainment is not what you might expect. The centerpiece of the evening is not a traditional female dancer or musician. It is a solitary figure, a woman dressed in a man's ceremonial robes, a long sword at her side. She wears a man's eboshi hat, and her face is a mask of cool, androgynous beauty. She is a Shirabyōshi dancer, and her very existence is a beautiful, bizarre contradiction. The Shirabyōshi were a distinct class of female performers who rose to prominence in the Heian and Kamakura periods. Their defining characteristic was that they were women who dressed in men's clothes and performed traditional male dances, often accompanied by singing. You are watching her now, and her movements are not delicate or graceful in a feminine way. They are strong, powerful, and deliberate, a performance that blurs the lines of gender and expectation. The powerful men in the hall, the ones who would enforce a strict gender hierarchy in their own homes, are captivated. But the Shirabyōshi's role was more than just a theatrical spectacle. They were highly sought-after companions and, often, courtesans for the aristocracy. Their cross-dressing wasn't just a costume, it was a part of their allure. The ambiguity of their identity was a potent form of entertainment, and their ability to move between the feminine and the masculine gave them a unique, almost mystical status. They were not just women who dressed as men. They were a third gender in a theatrical sense, and their patrons adored them for it. A mainstream historical fact is that one of the most famous Shirabyōshi, Shizuka Gozen, became the lover of the legendary samurai hero Minamoto no Yoshi. Her beauty, wit, and skill as a performer made her an influential figure, and she is remembered as one of the most powerful and tragic women of her era. A quirky and deeply ironic tidbit is that in a society where a woman's entire status was defined by her husband or father, the Shirabyōshi lived completely outside of these traditional structures. They were independent, owned their own property, and were often very wealthy. Their freedom was a direct result of their unusual profession. By stepping outside the prescribed roles for women, they were able to gain a kind of liberation that was completely unavailable to the noble women they entertained. It's an odd thought, isn't it? The most liberated women in the aristocracy's world were the ones who refused to be women in the traditional sense. Historians still argue whether the popularity of the Shirabyōshi represented a genuine acceptance of gender fluidity, or if it was more of a theatrical fantasy that served to reinforce, rather than challenge, the underlying patriarchal social structure. Did the powerful men who adored these dancers truly accept their independence and their ambiguous gender presentation? Or was it just a temporary, controlled flirtation with the forbidden? The answer, like so many things in this era, is a complex one, a tangle of contradiction and double standards. As the performance comes to an end, the Shirabyōshi dancer bows, her face still cool and unreadable. The room erupts in applause. The applause is not just for her dance, it's for her defiance. She is a woman who, by dressing as a man, has gained a kind of power that is unavailable to the noble women in the hall. She is a symbol of both subversion and entertainment, a beautiful anomaly in a world of rigid rules. And as you watch her leave, you get a sense that in a society so obsessed with order, some of the most compelling figures were the ones who were happy to break all the rules. The applause for the Shirabyōshi dancer fades, and the vibrant colors of her performance are replaced by the somber tones of a samurai training ground. The air, once filled with music and perfume, now smells of sweat, polished wood, and the raw, earthy scent of a mountain path. You've left the world of theatrical performance and entered a place of stark, disciplined reality. Tonight, we're taking a deeper look at the practice we touched on earlier, the tradition of male-male love among the samurai, but this time we're going to examine its philosophical core. This is the world of Shudō, or the way of the youth, and it was a practice as deeply ingrained in the samurai's code of honor as their skill with a sword. Shudō was not a casual or spontaneous act. It was a formal and highly structured tradition. It was an essential part of a young samurai's education and moral development, a way for an older, experienced warrior to guide a younger apprentice. The relationship was not one of equals. The older samurai or ninja was a mentor and a protector, and the younger apprentice, the Wakashu, was expected to be loyal, obedient, and devoted to his master. But what makes Shudō so unique is that this mentorship was cemented by a deep, romantic, and often sexual bond. This relationship was seen as a way to forge a bond of loyalty that was stronger than any other, a loyalty that could withstand the trials of the battlefield and the temptations of the world. Mainstream historical fact about Shudō is its explicit link to the samurai code of honor, Bushido. The relationship was believed to foster qualities essential for a warrior: self-control, discipline, loyalty, and a willingness to die for one's lord. The physical and emotional intimacy was not seen as a weakness, but as a way to deepen the spiritual bond between the two men. It was a love that was supposed to make a warrior better, not distract him. The famous samurai text, Hogakure, even praises this form of love, suggesting that the love between a man and a boy was a purer, more loyal, and more honorable bond than that with a woman, which was seen as potentially distracting and domesticating. You are watching a scene on a quiet path. A young samurai apprentice, no older than 16, is walking a few paces behind his older master. There are no words being exchanged, but the silence is not empty. It's filled with a quiet understanding, a mutual respect forged in shared discipline and a deep personal connection. The older samurai is not just his lover. He is his teacher, his protector, his lord. The younger man is not just his lover. He is his student, his loyal companion, and a living testament to his honor. The relationship is a bizarre blend of the paternal, the romantic, and the militaristic, all wrapped up in a strict, unbending code of honor. A quirky and deeply romantic tidbit is the literary legacy of Shudō. It was a popular theme in literature and art, often depicted in a highly tragic light. Stories and poems were written about young apprentices who, upon their master's death, would commit suicide to follow him into the afterlife, a final and beautiful act of devotion. This was not seen as a tragic waste of a life, but as the ultimate expression of Shudō, a love that transcended even death itself. It was a love that was meant to be immortal, a romantic ideal that has fascinated scholars for centuries. Historians still argue whether this philosophical ideal of Shudō was a true representation of the relationships or a post hoc justification. Was it a genuine spiritual and philosophical ideal, or was it a convenient way for a patriarchal, militaristic society to legitimize and control the power dynamic between older and younger men? It's a fascinating and complex question. You can't help but wonder if the men in these relationships truly saw them as a path to enlightenment, or if they were just doing what was accepted and expected of them. As you turn away from the quiet path, you get a sense that Shudō was more than just a sexual practice. It was a cornerstone of a social and military ideology, a way for a culture of warriors to find meaning and purpose in both love and death. It was a beautiful and deeply dangerous ideal, a bizarre and unique manifestation of the human heart's eternal quest for purpose, loyalty, and connection. The disciplined, stoic world of the samurai dissolves, and you're transported to a completely different side of feudal Japan. The air no longer smells of polished wood and incense, but of wet earth, rice paddies, and cooking smoke. You're in a rural village, a place where life is not dictated by courtly poems or the code of Bushido, but by the rhythm of the seasons and the hard work of the land. This is the world of the farmer, the vast majority of the population, and their relationship with love, sexuality, and the bizarre is far more earthy and practical than anything you've seen so far. Here, in the heart of the countryside, life is a constant struggle for survival. A good harvest means the difference between a full belly and starvation. The continuation of the family line means a steady supply of labor for the fields. For the farmers, sexuality was not a philosophical ideal or a form of political maneuvering. It was a powerful and often bawdy force of nature, inextricably linked to the fertility of the land itself. A mainstream historical fact is that, for rural communities, the sexual act was not just about pleasure. It was a deeply symbolic and practical part of life, a way to ensure the continuation of both the family and the harvest. A curious tradition you'll find in these villages is the practice of building large, sometimes humorous, phallic symbols for local festivals. These were not hidden away. They were paraded through the streets, a very public display meant to invoke the gods of fertility and ensure a bountiful rice crop. You watch as a group of men and women, laughing and joking, carry a massive wooden phallus down a village path, the air filled with their boisterous songs. This is a far cry from the subtle gestures of the Heian court or the quiet discipline of a samurai dojo, isn't it? Here, sex is out in the open, celebrated in its most raw and unrefined form, a powerful, magical force that is vital to the community's survival. It's still a point of discussion among academics, whether these folk practices were a form of religious belief or simply a practical and often bawdy way for a community to cope with the hardships of rural life. Were the farmers genuinely believing that a giant wooden phallus would make the crops grow, or was it a form of communal celebration that just so happened to have a strong sexual theme? The answer is probably a mixture of both, a reflection of a world where superstition and pragmatism went hand in hand. This culture saw nothing contradictory in working the fields all day and then celebrating the life-giving forces of nature with a loud, boisterous, and very public display of sexuality. You can see the difference in the way people interact. There is a directness here that was completely absent from the court. A young man and woman working side by side in the fields can joke and flirt openly. Their courtship is not conducted through poetry or artistic performance, but through shared labor and a mutual understanding of the struggle of their lives. Romance, when it happens, is quick, unadorned, and a simple part of the natural world. And as the sun begins to set over the rice paddies, you get a sense of a different kind of love, a love that is not about honor or power, but about survival. It's a love that is as earthy and unrefined as the soil itself, a connection forged in hard work, and a shared hope for a good harvest. The farmer's sexuality was a powerful force of nature, a raw, undeniable response to a life of labor and deep connection to the land. The quiet, hard-working rhythm of the village gives way to a crescendo of sound and color. The air thrums with the beat of festival drums and the high-pitched wail of bamboo flutes. You're no longer just observing. You're in the middle of a bustling festival, a community-wide celebration that is both religious and deeply carnal. This is a day for the gods, a day to honor the powerful, unseen forces that make the harvest possible. And for these farmers, the best way to do that is with a very public, very physical display of life itself. This celebration is part of a larger system of beliefs. A mainstream historical fact is the deep connection between Shintoism and agrarian life. Shinto, the indigenous religion of Japan, held that the deities, or kami, resided in nature, in the mountains, the rivers, and, most importantly, in the fields. Many rituals were performed to please these gods of fertility and ensure a good rice crop. These were not solemn, quiet prayers. They were boisterous, communal affairs where the sacred and the sexual were inextricably linked. The farmers believed that by celebrating human life and its procreative power, they were encouraging the gods to bless the land with life as well. You watch as a parade winds through the streets, led by men and women carrying enormous, decorated, phallic symbols. These symbols are not meant to be offensive. They are a sign of respect, a literal representation of the life-giving force that is central to both human and agricultural life. You might be surprised to learn of a particular custom from some of these regions. During a festival, it wasn't uncommon for young men and women to run through the fields, often naked, in a ritual meant to bless the crops. This was not considered a scandalous act, but a sacred one, a way to infuse the barren land with the raw, chaotic energy of human vitality. It's a beautifully simple, if completely wild, form of prayer, isn't it? We give you our life force, O gods. Now please, give us a good harvest. The interpretation of these rituals has long been a source of scholarly debate. Were these festivals purely religious acts of prayer, or did they also serve a dual purpose as sanctioned opportunities for sexual freedom and communal bonding? For a society that was otherwise so rigid, were these festivals a necessary pressure release? A time when the rules of everyday life could be suspended in the name of the gods? It's a fascinating question, a testament to the way that human culture finds ways to reconcile the sacred with the profane. As the sun begins to set, the celebration only gets wilder. The music grows louder, the people dance with more abandon, and the flirtations between men and women become more overt. You get a sense of a community that has put aside its daily struggles to come together and celebrate the most fundamental aspect of their lives, the continuation of life itself. It's a powerful and deeply human spectacle, a reminder that for all the complexities of the samurai court and the pleasure quarters, the heart of this society lay in the fields, and its most fundamental rituals were about a connection to the earth and to each other. The bizarre nature of these ceremonies reveals a world that was not afraid to see the sacred in the sexual, and a world that understood that the forces that make a family and the forces that make a harvest are, at their core, one and the same. The boisterous laughter and rhythmic drums of the festival fade, and you are led to a place of profound quiet. The air, once filled with the earthy smells of the harvest, is now clean and sharp, scented with a hint of steel and old wood. You're in a samurai estate, a place you visited before, but this time your focus is not on the husband or his companions, but on his wife. You see her, not in a room full of servants or at a formal tea ceremony, but in a quiet practice yard. Her face, which just hours ago was a mask of placid domesticity, is now a study in fierce concentration. She holds a long, curved weapon with a blade at the end of Naganoten. Her movements are not those of a dancer, but of a warrior. This is the world of the Onna-bugeisha, the female warrior. And her life was a beautiful and brutal double life. While popular culture often depicts samurai society as exclusively male, a mainstream historical fact is that female warriors were a documented, if not widespread, part of the samurai class. The Onna-bugeisha's role was typically to defend the home, the village, and her children in the absence of her husband, or sometimes to join her lord in battle. She was an essential part of the military machine, a woman who was expected to balance the domestic duties of running a household with the lethal precision of a warrior. She was a mother who could wield a weapon, a wife who could defend a castle, a living embodiment of the contradictions of her time. You'll be fascinated by the details of their weaponry. The naginata, a long-bladed polem, was considered a particularly suitable weapon for women. Its length allowed them to fight effectively against a male opponent's sword from a distance, using leverage and technique rather than brute force. They were also trained in the use of the keikon, a small, concealed knife, which they carried for self-defense and, in the ultimate expression of honor, to commit ritual suicide if captured. These women were not just trained to fight. They were trained to die with honor, just like their male counterparts. A central debate in modern scholarship is just how common these female warriors truly were. Were they a widespread, if small, part of the samurai class, or were they a rare, almost mythologized exception to the rule? We have many stories and legends of famous Onna-bugeisha, like Tomogozen, a fierce warrior who fought in the Genpei War. But were these figures the norm, or were they so famous precisely because they were so rare? The historical record presents a compelling question. A society that placed such a high value on a woman's domesticity and submissiveness also had a place for women who could fight and die just as fiercely as any man. You watch as the Onna-bugeisha finishes her practice, her breathing heavy but controlled. She wipes the sweat from her brow with a small cloth and walks back towards the house, her warrior's posture slowly giving way to the graceful walk of a wife and mother. She is a fascinating blend of two worlds, a woman who could, in the same day, oversee the household budget and lead a charge into battle. Her life was a constant performance, a dance between the societal expectations of femininity and the brutal reality of her martial duty. As she enters the house, she puts her neck away, not with a sense of relief, but with a sense of purpose. Her life is one of quiet strength and incredible responsibility, a world where the ability to nurture and the ability to kill were not seen as opposing forces, but as two sides of the same coin. She is a beautiful and complex manifestation of strength in a world of rigid gender roles, a testament to the fact that even in the most prescribed of lives, there was always room for a different kind of power. The sound of the naginata's whisper is replaced by the soft rustle of silk and the gentle chime of a wind bell. You've left the disciplined world of the female warrior and entered a place of profound elegance and, surprisingly, solitude. This is the home of a noble woman during the Heian period, and it is a world unto itself. This isn't her husband's home. It's her own, a fact that is both beautiful and deeply telling. You are witnessing the practice of the Sanjo marriage system, a tradition that gave women a surprising degree of autonomy. A mainstream historical fact is that, in this period, noble women often did not move into their husband's home. The husband would instead visit his wife at her family's estate. This practice had immense implications for a woman's life. She maintained control over her own property and finances, managed her own servants, and her children were raised in her home, often under the guidance of her father and brothers. She was not just a wife. She was a figure of power in her own right, a mistress of her own domain. This is a stark and elegant contrast to later periods, where a woman's identity was almost completely subsumed by her husband's. You are watching a noble woman, a figure of incredible grace and quiet authority as she sits in her private chamber. She is not waiting for her husband in a state of nervous anticipation. She is reading a scroll, perhaps a new poem or a chapter of a novel like The Tale of Genji, a text written by a woman of this very era. She is surrounded by her own court of ladies-in-waiting, and her home is a hub of culture and intellectual life. The husband, when he arrives, is not the lord of this house. He is a visitor, albeit a very important one, a truly peculiar detail. Of this system was the way courtship and visits were conducted. A woman would often communicate with her male suitors from behind a screen or a curtain, a practice that maintained her modesty and added to the mystique. This meant that the first physical sight of a partner might not happen until after a long courtship of exchanged poems and whispered conversations. Even after marriage, the husband's visits could be a nightly affair, but the woman still maintained her separate household. It was a beautiful, but deeply formal, kind of love. The woman had her own life, her own routines, and her own power, and the man had to fit into it. The degree of true independence these women possessed remains a point of scholarly discussion. While they had control over their homes and property, were they truly free? Or was their life still largely controlled by their fathers and brothers, who, in this system, had the final say over whom they married and how their property was managed? It's a compelling question, one that gets at the heart of the complex relationship between social structure and personal autonomy. Was the Sanjo system a form of genuine empowerment, or just a different kind of gilded cage? As the moon rises, and the noble woman puts her scroll away, you get a sense of her world. It is a world of quiet strength, of intellectual pursuit, and of a strange and beautiful independence. She is not a warrior with a naginata, but she wields a different kind of power, a power that comes from her position as the mistress of her own home. She is a woman who, in a society of men, has found a way to create a life that is truly her own, a stark and elegant contrast to the lives of women in later eras. The elegance of the Heian noblewoman's world dissolves, and the soft rustle of her silk kimono is replaced by the guttural, distant sound of war drums. The air, which once smelled of incense, is now thick with the scent of fear and the promise of impending violence. You're in a world torn apart by conflict, the Sengoku period, or Warring States era. And the love stories here are not about delicate poems or quiet autonomy. They are about brutal separation, profound loss, and the tragic reality of a world where life was cheap and love was a fragile, fleeting thing. A mainstream historical fact is that during this time, civil war was a constant, devastating force. This meant that the men of the samurai class, from the highest lords to the lowest-ranking foot soldiers, were almost always on the move, marching to some distant battlefield. For the women they left behind, this meant a life of constant uncertainty. A husband, a son, a brother, any one of them could be called to battle and never return. Romance was not a leisurely pursuit. It was a desperate gamble against the certainty of death and the possibility of a lifetime of mourning. You are watching a farewell, a scene that played out countless times across the country. A young warrior is preparing to leave for battle. His wife is helping him with his armor, her hands moving with a practiced, somber grace. There are no words being spoken, but the silence is heavy with unspoken emotion. This could be the last time they ever see each other. He hands her a poem, a short haiku-like verse about the beauty of the cherry blossoms, knowing that by the time they bloom again, he may be gone. An intensely emotional detail of these partings was the custom of a wife, cutting a lock of her hair and giving it to her husband. This was not a fashion statement. It was a powerful, symbolic act. The hair, a part of her living self, was a good luck charm, a piece of her that would go with him into battle, protecting him from harm. It was also a physical reminder of his home and the love he was fighting for. You watch as the young wife performs this ritual, her hands trembling as she cuts the lock of black hair. It's a testament to the fact that, in a world where everything was uncertain, people found a way to create a physical, tangible link to their loved ones, a small piece of permanence in a world of constant change. The psychological impact of this constant state of warfare on personal relationships is a subject of ongoing study for historians. Did these tragic circumstances make love more intense, more passionate, and more profound? Or did they make people more cautious, more guarded, and more cynical about the very idea of a lasting connection? Was love seen as a beautiful, but ultimately futile pursuit in a world destined for tragedy? The emotional weight of these questions is almost as heavy as the armor the young warrior is wearing. As the warrior leaves, his wife does not cry. She watches him go with a stoic, unreadable expression, a testament to the resilience of the women of this era. She then goes inside to pray at the family shrine, not for his victory, but for his safe return. Her love is a quiet, powerful force, a silent prayer against the brutal chaos of the world. And as you fade from this tragic moment, you understand that in a world of constant war, the most bizarre thing about love was not its form or its ritual, but its sheer audacity to exist at all. The lingering fear of loss from the battlefield gives way to the profound, unsettling finality of death. You're no longer in a world of uncertainty, but in a quiet, solemn room where a tragic and beautiful ritual is about to take place. The warrior from the previous section has fallen in battle, and his wife, the woman who gave him her lock of hair, is now preparing for a final act of devotion. This is the world of Junshi, or following in death, and it is perhaps the most bizarre and tragic expression of love we have encountered. It is well documented that a key part of samurai culture was the practice of junshi. This was not a random act of grief. It was a ritualistic and honorable form of suicide. It was most famously performed by samurai retainers who would follow their lord in death, a final act of loyalty. But in some cases, this practice extended to wives as well. For a wife, junshi was seen as the ultimate expression of her devotion to her husband, a way to join him in the afterlife and prove her unending loyalty. It was a societal expectation, a final act of love that was seen not as a tragedy, but as a beautiful and noble fulfillment of her purpose. You are watching the woman as she prepares. She is not weeping or hysterical. Her movements are calm and deliberate, a testament to the years of training in stoicism and honor. She is putting on a simple, white kimono, the traditional color of death in Japan. This is not an act of a grieving widow. This is the final, resolute act of a samurai wife. She is fulfilling her duty not just to her husband, but to her family name, her ancestors. and the very code that governs her life. What's especially poignant is the ritual of the Jeze, or death poem. Before the final act, the wife would write a short poem, a final expression of her love and her thoughts on life and death. The poem would often speak of the fleeting beauty of the world, of the joy of their life together, and the hope of meeting again in the next world. You can almost feel the weight of her grief and love as she dips a brush in ink and begins to write. This final artistic act of creation, in the face of her own self-destruction, is a powerful and heart-wrenching paradox. It is a moment of profound beauty in the face of profound tragedy. The interpretation of this practice is a source of much scholarly debate. Was junshi a true act of love and devotion, or was it a form of extreme social pressure? Was a woman given a genuine choice, or was her honor and her family's reputation so deeply tied to this act that she had no real option but to comply? It's a chilling question. To modernize, it is a barbaric act of oppression. But for the people of this time, it was an act of the highest honor, a final, powerful testament to a love that was not meant to last a lifetime, but to transcend it. And so, as the wife finishes her poem and prepares for her final act, you are left with a single, profound thought. In a world of fleeting cherry blossoms and constant war, the love between a samurai and his wife was a strange and powerful thing. It was a love that was defined not by how long it lasted, but by how intensely it was felt, and by the ultimate and most bizarre act of devotion a woman could perform. The solemn, ritualized grief of the samurai's death poem fades, and the world of high-minded ritual gives way to a much more bustling and much less glamorous place. You're standing in a lantern-lit street, a place we visited before, but this time, you're looking deeper into its very structure. This is not the world of the high-ranking Oiran we met earlier, but the world of the women collectively known as Yujo, a general term for the women who worked in the pleasure quarters. Though the term Yujo is broad, it encompassed a strict hierarchy. From the revered courtesans at the top to the women at the very bottom, who had almost no voice at all. It is a well-documented aspect of this world that the lives of the Yujo were governed by an incredibly strict set of rules. They lived in public houses, known as Oyonya or Aja, and their daily lives were a repetitive cycle of service, entertainment, and hope. Their lives were controlled by managers, and they had very little freedom. You were observing a group of young women, not in the extravagant kimonos of an Oiran, but in simpler, more subdued attire. They are sitting behind wooden bars, a common practice in the lower-tiered houses. They are trying to attract the attention of the men who walk by, the artisans, the street vendors, the law-ranking soldiers. Unlike the Oiran who could choose their clients, the Yujo here had almost no power. They were women who sold their labor and their bodies to survive in a harsh world. A truly poignant detail about their lives was the role of the love letter. While many Yujo were illiterate, there was a separate profession of letter writers who would write romantic letters for their clients. These letters were written in a poetic, hopeful language, creating an illusion of love and personal connection. It's both an ironic and heartbreaking truth that in a world where love was a commodity, the illusion of it was bought and sold just as often. A matter of ongoing scholarly debate is whether these Yujo found any true autonomy or personal power within such a rigid and oppressive system. Did they form genuine friendships, find love, or create any sense of personal meaning outside of the roles they were assigned by society? While we have stories of a few women who managed to find freedom, for the vast majority, their lives were a repeating cycle defined by control and dependence. And as you look into the eyes behind the bars, you realize a simple, heartbreaking truth. While the high-ranking Oiran were the stars and the cultural icons, the Yujo were the beating heart of the pleasure quarter, a heart that pulsed with stories of survival and hope. They may have had no power, but their very existence is a testament to the complexity, contradiction, and sometimes the sheer brutality of feudal Japanese society. The rhythmic, heartbreaking cycle of the Yujo's life fades, and you're swept away from the confines of the pleasure quarters into the vibrant, chaotic streets of Edo. The air, once thick with the scent of cheap perfume and sorrow, now smells of street food, sawdust, and the intoxicating energy of a public spectacle. This is a different kind of world, one that exists on the fringes of samurai society, and it is a world where gender and sexuality were far more fluid than you might expect. We're going to talk about the okama and nanshoku of the commoner class, beyond the formal, ritualized love of the samurai. A different kind of male-male relationship existed, one rooted in performance and entertainment rather than honor and duty. It's a documented fact that in the commoner class, a male-male relationship, or nanshoku, was not uncommon. But what truly sets this subculture apart was the role of the okama, or male crossdresser. These men were performers who, for a paying audience, adopted female personas. They would perform on stage, act in plays, and often lived their lives as a kind of celebrity, blurring the lines of gender for a captivated audience. This was a form of gender fluidity that was not tied to the philosophical underpinnings of the samurai, but rather to the much more practical world of commerce and entertainment. You are watching a performance now, in a small, crowded theater. The stage is lit by flickering lanterns, and a man, dressed in a beautiful kimono with his face powdered white, is performing a graceful dance. His movements are a perfect imitation of a woman's, his voice a convincing falsetto. The audience, a mix of artisans, merchants, and laborers, is completely captivated. There are no samurai here, no strict code of honor to adhere to. This is a world where the rules of gender can be broken, as long as it makes for good entertainment. It is a spectacle that shows the incredible, if sometimes contradictory, desire of a society to both enforce and escape its own rules. What's fascinating about this subculture is the deep connection between the performers and their audience. These okama often had dedicated fan bases, much like modern celebrities. Their images were captured in ukiyo-e prints, and they were the subjects of popular gossip and conversation. An intriguing detail of this world was the fact that a man could have a relationship with an okama without the severe social stigma that came with being the passive partner in a samurai's nanshoku relationship, because the okama was, in a sense, a professional performer. The act was seen as a part of a commercial transaction rather than a loss of social status. It was a bizarre and convenient loophole in a society obsessed with status. The motivations behind this form of performance are still a point of academic discussion. Was the phenomenon of the okama an expression of genuine gender identity, or was it purely a form of entertainment and commerce? Were these men creating a space for their true selves to exist? Or were they simply clever entrepreneurs who found a way to sell a bizarre spectacle to a curious public? It's likely a complex mix of both, a subculture born out of a desire for both self-expression and survival, thriving in the shadow of a rigid social order, and as the performance ends, and the male performer takes a final bow, you get a sense of a world that was far more vibrant and chaotic than we often imagine. A world where, on the streets of Edo, gender and sexuality were not static concepts, but a form of performance, a beautiful and sometimes tragic dance between a person's inner self and the expectations of the world. The vibrant chaos of Edo's streets and the performances of the Okama fade into a silent, moonlit night. The smell of sawdust and street food is replaced by the earthy scent of moss and pine. You find yourself standing at the entrance to a small, secluded Shinto shrine, marked by a series of red torii gates that stretch into the darkness. Statues of foxes stand guard, their stone eyes seeming to follow your every move. This is the mystical world of the Inari and Kitsune cults, a place where love and sexuality were not matters of human law, but of supernatural power in the spiritual landscape of Japan. A belief that was widely held was that the fox spirit, or kitsune, was a powerful and cunning shapeshifter. As the messenger of Inari, the major Shinto deity of rice, fertility, and prosperity, the kitsune held a unique position. It was a well-established part of Japanese folklore that these foxes could take on human form, often that of a beautiful and seductive woman. The myth of the kitsune-yome, or foxwife, is a classic folktale where a man marries a stunning woman, only to discover she is secretly a fox spirit. These stories were not just campfire tales. They were a way for people to explain the unexplainable, particularly in matters of love and desire. You can almost hear the whispered legends in the rustling of the leaves. A man, walking alone at night, meets a beautiful woman who seduces him. She seems perfect until a dog barks, and her true form is revealed for a split second, a flash of a fox's tail. The tale often has a strong sexual undertone, exploring themes of love, deceit, and the powerful, chaotic nature of the supernatural. It was a convenient way for a man to explain a sudden infatuation that defied social norms, or an affair that came out of nowhere. It wasn't his fault. It was the work of a seductive fox spirit. An intriguing detail of these beliefs was the very specific rituals people would perform to ask for blessings in matters of the heart. You might be surprised to learn that people would offer fried tofu or aborige to the fox statues at Inari shrines. This was believed to be the fox's favorite food, and by offering it, a person could ask Inari, through her messengers, to help them with love, marriage, or fertility. These were not grand, public displays, but quiet, personal acts of devotion, a sign of a deep-seated belief that the most profound human emotions were tied to the unseen. Spiritual world, the psychological function of these myths is a subject of academic discussion. Were the myths of the kitsune-yome simply entertaining stories, or did they serve as a psychological coping mechanism? Did they offer a supernatural explanation for a man's unpredictable desires or a woman's perceived capriciousness? These myths provided a narrative framework for understanding the powerful and often confusing nature of love and infatuation, suggesting that these emotions were not entirely within human control, but a gift or a curse from a supernatural force. As the moonlight glints off the stone eyes of a fox statue, you get a sense of a different kind of bizarre love, a love that was not bound by human law, social status, or the rules of a samurai lord, but by the ancient untamed forces of nature and myth. For a great many people, the most profound aspects of love and sexuality were found not in the crowded cities, but in the silent, supernatural world of gods and spirits. The mystical rustling of the fox spirits fades, and the earthy spiritual world of the Inari cults is replaced by a much more grounded and somber reality. You're no longer in a place of reverence, but in a slum on the outskirts of a bustling city, a place of poverty and profound exclusion. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed clothes and cooking fires. and the sounds are not of prayers or legends, but of human struggle. This is the world of the Heinin and other outcasts, the non-humans of feudal Japan, and their lives and loves existed completely outside the official social order. Historical accounts confirm the existence of the Hinin, or non-humans, a class of people who, along with other outcasts, were at the very bottom of feudal Japan's rigid social hierarchy. They were not included in the four main classes of samurai, farmer, artisan, and merchant. They lived in their own communities, often on the outskirts of towns or along riverbanks, and performed tasks that were considered ritually unclean, such as execution, butchering, or acting as watchmen. This profound social exclusion, however, came with a strange and unexpected consequence, a unique form of freedom in matters of the heart. Without the burden of family honor, political marriages, or the strict moral codes of the upper classes, their romantic relationships were often based on personal choice and genuine affection. You are watching a small, simple wedding ceremony taking place in a clearing by the river. There are no fancy kimonos, no official priest, no guests of high social standing. A man and a woman, both dressed in simple, worn clothes, are making their vows to each other in front of their small community. Their love is not a political alliance, or a matter of duty to their families. It is a simple, human connection forged in a shared life of hardship. In a world where a samurai's love was a matter of honor and a noblewoman's love was a matter of property, this simple, heartfelt love was a luxury denied to almost everyone else in society. An unexpected aspect of their lives was that these outcast communities developed their own unwritten codes of conduct and their own forms of community support. It's a curious detail that they had their own rituals for marriage and death, which were not officially recognized by the state. Their love stories were not recorded in official documents, but were passed down through oral tradition in the songs and stories of their people. It was a culture that existed in the shadows, creating its own sense of meaning and purpose in a world that had deemed them worthless. Scholars continue to debate whether this was a true form of freedom or simply a byproduct of their extreme poverty. Was their ability to choose a partner a genuine benefit of their outcast status? Or was it a freedom born out of desperation, a life without the protection or resources of the state? The interpretation of their autonomy is a source of much scholarly discussion, a debate that highlights the complex and often contradictory nature of freedom itself. Was it a good life? No. But was there a kind of liberty in their suffering that the samurai could only dream of? As the simple wedding ceremony ends and the couple walks away, hand in hand, you are left with a single, profound thought. Even in the most rigid and unforgiving of societies, there were always spaces, however marginalized, where people could find a different kind of love, a love that was free from the constraints of power, duty, and status, a love that was defined only by the people who shared it. The gritty reality of the outcast's world recedes, and the smell of poverty and struggle is replaced by the crisp, clean air of a mountain shrine. You are no longer in a place of social exclusion, but in a world of spiritual order. The rising sun casts a soft light through the trees, illuminating the path to a sacred space. Here, the bizarre aspects of love and sexuality were not about politics or survival, but about the divine. We are going to explore the role of the Miko, the Shinto priestess, and the rituals that connected the sacred to the sensual. Historical accounts of Shinto practices reveal that the Miko played a unique and vital role. These Shinto priestesses, and attendants were typically young, unmarried women associated with purity and virginity. Their primary duties included performing ritual dances, known as kogaru, to communicate with the gods kami and to purify sacred spaces. This association with purity and the divine makes the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, sexual symbolism in their rituals even more fascinating. The Miko's role was to be a conduit for the gods, a bridge between the human and the divine, and that bridge was often built on the very human, life-giving power of fertility. You are watching a ritual now. A Miko, dressed in a white kimono and red trousers, is performing a graceful dance. She holds a bell and a sprig of sacred bells, and her movements are fluid and precise. The dance is beautiful, but you can feel the undertones, the movements, the rhythm of the bells, the incantations. They are all meant to invoke the life-giving power of the gods, the same power that makes the crops grow and brings forth new life. The ritual is not explicitly sexual, but its purpose is, in a way, profoundly so. It is a prayer for procreation, for fertility, and for the continuation of life in all its forms. An unusual detail about their spiritual work was the belief in divine possession. It's a curious piece of information that during some of these rituals, the Miko were believed to be possessed by a deity. In these moments, their movements could become powerful and non-traditional, and their voices might utter prophecies or messages from the gods. This spiritual possession could have a powerful, almost erotic effect on the observers, who were witnessing a mortal woman become the vessel for a divine power. It was a bizarre and beautiful paradox, a moment when the sacred and the sensual were completely intertwined in the form of a young, pure priestess. The line between the spiritual and the erotic in these rituals is a subject of much discussion. Among scholars, was the Miko simply a symbolic representation of the spiritual life force, a tool used to invoke the gods? Or was her role, with its undertones of fertility and divine possession, a way for a society to integrate the body and sexuality into its spiritual life, seeing the procreative act not as something profane, but as a sacred and essential part of the life cycle? The debate highlights the complex and often paradoxical nature of Japanese spiritual beliefs. As the dance ends, and the Miko returns to her serene, human state, you are left with a single, profound thought. In this world, the sexual was not a forbidden topic to be hidden away, but a sacred and essential part of the spiritual life. The Miko was a living bridge between the human world and the divine, and her very existence was a testament to the bizarre, beautiful, and deeply intertwined nature of purity and procreation in feudal Japan. The serene spiritual calm of the Shinto shrine and the solemnity of the Miko's dance fade. The air, once scented with pine and incense, is now thick with steam, the smell of soap, and the sound of splashing water. You are in a public bathhouse, or sentu, in a bustling city like Edo. This is not a place of spiritual purification, but of communal life, and its bizarre role in the lives of commoners was far more complex than just getting clean. Here, the lines between hygiene, social life, and sexuality were blurred, creating a truly unique environment for the majority of the population. A central aspect of daily life was the public bathhouse. Most homes did not have private bathing facilities, so the sentu was a crucial part of their routine. These spaces were communal and often mixed gender, which made them a unique social environment. It was a place for gossip, for business deals, and for a level of uninhibited social interaction that was rare in other parts of society. But beyond their role as a social hub, these bathhouses played another, more clandestine role, which centered around a specific type of worker. The role of the yuna, or bathhouse girls, is where things get truly fascinating. While their official duties included helping patrons with bathing, scrubbing backs, washing hair, their unofficial duties often involved providing sexual services. They were, in essence, a type of sex worker who operated within the confines of the bathhouse. This created a bizarre duality. A public space meant for cleanliness and community was also a place where sex was a commonly accepted transaction. It was a societal loophole, a place where a man could seek pleasure under the pretense of seeking cleanliness. Rather curious detail about these establishments was the government's repeated attempts to regulate them. You might be surprised to learn that authorities would issue strict edicts banning the practice of the yuna, often with very little success. In response, the bathhouses would simply change their names to something more innocuous, like hair washing houses, and the practice would continue unabated. This cycle of regulation and clever avoidance highlights a fundamental truth about this society. While the official government was concerned with moral order, the reality of everyday life was often much more pragmatic and uninhibited. The dual function of these bathhouses is a subject of much scholarly debate. Scholars continue to analyze whether the yuna was seen as a legitimate, if lower class, profession, or if they were viewed as a moral ill that the authorities constantly had to try and fix. Was the government's repeated failure to stamp out the practice a sign of its powerlessness, or was it a sign that the practice was simply too ingrained in the social fabric to be truly eradicated? The debate shows the complex relationship between law, morality, and the day-to-day realities of common people's lives. As you step out of the bathhouse, the steam clinging to your skin, you are left with a single, profound thought. In a society with strict divisions between the public and private, and between the moral and the immoral, there were still spaces where those lines were blurred. The bathhouses were a testament to this, a bizarre and vibrant social hub where hygiene and sexuality were, for a time, a single, intertwined practice. The sounds of the bathhouse, the laughter and splashing water, fade into a deep and profound silence. The air, once thick with steam, is now still and dry, carrying the scent of old paper and burning incense. You are no longer in a place of communal living, but in a small, secluded chamber filled with scrolls, strange diagrams, and various ritual tools. This is the private world of the Onmyō, the masters of Japanese cosmology and magic, and in this world, love was not a matter of the heart, but of fate, ritual, and a little bit of magic. It's well documented that in feudal Japan, the practice of Onmyō had a surprising impact on the personal lives of people from all social classes, rooted in Chinese philosophy and a mix of folk beliefs. The Onmyō was a system of divination, purification, and magic that was believed to influence the world. The practitioners, or onmyoji, were consulted for everything from building a house on a lucky day to predicting a person's future. But a significant part of their work, perhaps the most emotionally charged, was related to love, marriage, and fertility. People, desperate to find a partner or to keep one, would turn to these mystical figures for help, believing that their romantic lives could be influenced by a well-placed spell or a lucky charm. You are watching an onmyoji at work now. He sits, surrounded by his tools, his eyes closed in deep concentration. A young, nervous woman sits opposite him, whispering her request. She wants the man she loves to finally notice her. The onmyoji listens, then begins to draw a complex diagram on a piece of paper. This is not a simple prayer. This is a ritual designed to influence the very cosmic forces that govern human emotions. An unusual detail about their magical work was the use of love charms and curses. You might be surprised to learn that a common practice involved creating specific diagrams, or fuda, that were written with complex symbols and incantations. These fuda were designed to be burned or hidden in a lover's home, with the belief that the spell would then take effect. A client might request a charm to make a specific person fall in love with them, or, in a more sinister turn, a curse to break up a rival's relationship. It was a bizarre and powerful way for people to feel like they had control over a part of their lives that was, for the most part, completely out of their hands. The interpretation of these practices as either genuine belief or clever manipulation is a point of scholarly discussion. Were the onmyuji truly masters of a powerful unseen force, or were they simply clever con artists preying on the romantic anxieties of the public? The reality is likely a mix of both. The power of belief is a real thing, and a person who truly believed that a charm would make them more attractive might just become more confident in the process. The onmyuji were, in a way, masters of folk psychology, using a mix of ritual and a deep understanding of human emotion to get paid. As the onmyuji hands the young woman the fuda and a final word of advice, you are left with a single, profound thought. For people of all social classes, love was not just a matter of the heart, but also of fate, magic, and sometimes desperate manipulation. It was a bizarre and mystical way for people to deal with the most powerful and uncontrollable of human emotions. The quiet, mystical chamber of the diviner fades, and the scent of incense is replaced by the delicate fragrance of jasmine and the soft strumming of a shamisen. You are no longer in a world of magic and cosmic forces, but in a small, intimate tea house, a world of elegance and unspoken tension. Here, in the inner sanctum of the geisha, love and sexuality were not matters of chance, but of ritual, power, and a complex social contract. We are going to explore the geisha's mating rituals and the unique relationships that defined their lives. In the delicate social fabric of the pleasure quarters, a unique relationship existed, the dana system. This was a well-established and recognized practice where a wealthy, typically married, man would become a geisha's permanent patron. He would not just be a client. He would pay for her lavish lifestyle, her debts, and her extensive education in the arts. In exchange, he would receive her exclusive companionship and emotional support. It was a relationship that blurred the lines between a professional arrangement and a romantic one, creating a form of partnership that was both a financial contract and an emotional bond. You are watching a geisha and her dana now. They are not touching, but the air is thick with unspoken communication. The geisha pours him sake with a formal, graceful movement, and he watches her with a look that is both possessive and tender. This is a love story that is both real and a performance. The geisha is an artist, and part of her art is making her dana feel like he is the most important man in the world. It is a fragile dance, built on respect, financial dependence, and a strange kind of devotion that existed entirely outside the traditional social norms of marriage. An unusual detail about the dana system was its accepted place in society. It is a curious piece of information that the dana's wife was often aware of the arrangement, and as long as the geisha did not threaten the man's family or business interests, she would often tolerate it. The relationship was not just a matter of passion, it was a financial and social contract. The geisha's well-being was tied to the dana's success, and his status was enhanced by being able to support a celebrated geisha. It was a system that, in a bizarre way, functioned as a kind of second marriage for the man, and a kind of financial security for the woman. The true nature of these relationships is a subject of much debate. Scholars continue to analyze whether the geisha were willing participants in a viable social structure, or if they were victims of a system of exploitation, where their bodies and emotional labor were bought and sold. Was the Dana system a form of sanctioned prostitution, or was it a path to a kind of independence and financial security that was otherwise unavailable to women of that time? The answer is likely somewhere in the middle, a complex mix of both agency and oppression, a bizarre paradox of empowerment and exploitation. As the geisha plays a gentle melody on her shamisen, the sound filling the quiet room, you are left with a final, profound thought. In the world of high art and elegance, love and sex were intertwined with money, power, and a bizarre set of social rules. The geisha's mating rituals were a testament to this, a strange and beautiful dance between the desire for affection and the harsh realities of a patriarchal society, creating a kind of love that was as fragile as it was enduring. The delicate strumming of the shamisen and the emotionally charged world of the geisha fade into a profound silence. The air, once scented with jasmine, is now still, carrying only the subtle, fleeting aroma of fine incense. You are no longer in a world of social contracts, but in a small, elegant room with tatami mats, where a sense of profound calm and heightened sensory awareness prevails. This is the world of Kodo, the way of fragrance, a ritual that was not just about smell, but about a form of communication that was subtle, sensual, and utterly bizarre. A well-established art form in noble and samurai society was Kodo, one of the three classical arts of refinement, alongside the tea ceremony and flower arrangement. It was a formal, meditative practice where participants would identify different types of incense and appreciate their subtle aromas. The ceremony was a quiet, almost spiritual affair, a way to purify the mind and heighten one's senses. But beneath the surface of this refined ritual lay a fascinating and often romantic use, where scents were not just smells, but a language of love and desire. You are a guest at a Kodo ceremony. The host carefully places a tiny piece of wood on a glowing charcoal briquette inside a small censer. A thin wisp of smoke rises, carrying with it a complex and beautiful aroma. The censer is passed around, and each participant inhales the scent, trying to guess its origin and appreciate its layers. This is a communal ritual, but for two lovers in the room, it is a private conversation. The scent of sandalwood might be a reminder of a shared night, while the spicy aroma of agarwood could be a symbol of a passionate desire. The shared experience of scent becomes a form of intimate communication, a sensual dance of shared sensation that is more personal than a simple conversation. An unusual detail about this art form was its use in courtship. It's a curious piece of information that a lover might leave a specific type of incense behind to leave a lingering, fragrant reminder of their presence. This was a sort of scented love letter, a poetic act of leaving a piece of oneself behind that only the recipient would understand. The lingering aroma on a kimono or a pillow was a powerful, intimate memory, a physical manifestation of a person's presence long after they had gone. It was a way to communicate a desire, a memory, or a promise without a single word being spoken. The line between the spiritual and the sensual in Kodo is a subject of much debate. Scholars continue to analyze whether the primary purpose of Kodo was truly about spiritual purification, or if it was, at its core, a highly refined and formalized form of courtship and sensual pleasure for the elite. The ritual provided a safe space for men and women to be together, to share an intimate experience without breaking any social rules. It allowed for a kind of romantic subtlety that was otherwise denied to them in a rigid, formal society. As the scent of the incense fades into the still air of the room, you are left with a single, profound thought. Even in the most refined and seemingly asexual of rituals, the human desire for sensual connection and intimate communication found a way to express itself. The world of Kodo was a testament to this, a bizarre and beautiful world of scented love, where a simple aroma could hold a story of 1,000 unspoken words. The delicate wisp of incense smoke and the subtle, sensual world of Kodo fade into the sharp, biting cold of a mountaintop. The quiet elegance of the room is replaced by the profound, lonely silence of a deep forest. You are no longer in a world of refined pleasure, but in a world of profound spiritual struggle and self-denial. Here, in the harsh wilderness, the most bizarre expression of love and desire was not found in a person, but in the ultimate rejection of the physical self. We are going to explore the ritual of self-discipline practiced by the Yamabushi, the mountain ascetics, in the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. A fascinating and extreme path was taken by the Yamabushi, or those who prostrate themselves in the mountains. They were practitioners of Shugendo, a syncretic religion that blended Shinto, esoteric Buddhism, and ancient folk beliefs. Their training was incredibly rigorous, involving long periods of fasting, meditating in freezing rivers, and surviving in the harsh wilderness. For them, the physical body and its base desires were not to be indulged, but to be overcome. They used intense suffering and self-denial as a way to gain spiritual power and achieve enlightenment. You are watching a Yamabushi now, a lone figure in a white robe, standing under a cold, misty waterfall. The water crashes down on his head, his body trembling with cold and exhaustion, but his eyes are closed in deep meditation. For him, this is not an act of self-torture, it is an act of purification. Every physical sensation, the cold, the hunger, the pain is an obstacle to be overcome, a distraction from his spiritual goal. And among these desires, the most powerful and persistent was the sexual one. For the Yamabushi, the greatest act of love and the greatest spiritual triumph was a form of radical self-discipline, a profound and complete rejection of physical desire. An unusual detail about their training was the practice of ritual suicide. It is a curious piece of information that some Yamabushi would, after a period of intense training, perform a final ritual called Sakushin Butsu, which involved an extreme form of self-denial that ended in mummification while still alive. While this was not a widespread practice, the very existence of such a ritual highlights the extreme lengths to which these ascetics would go to master their physical selves. It was the ultimate ritual of self-discipline, a final, total rejection of the body in favor of the spiritual. The psychological and spiritual role of this asceticism is a subject of much debate. Scholars continue to analyze whether this was a true path to enlightenment or if it was a form of extreme psychological and physical masochism, a way to find meaning through suffering. Was their intense training a way to truly master the self? Or was it a form of escape from a world they could not bear to live in? The debate highlights the thin line between spiritual ecstasy and psychological distress, and the human capacity for both. As the Yamabushi continues his meditation under the cold waterfall, you are left with a final, profound thought. In a world full of bizarre expressions of love and passion, There was a path where the greatest and most profound expression was the complete and total rejection of it. The Yamabushi's path was a testament to this, a bizarre and ultimate form of self-discipline, a spiritual climax that was born not from pleasure, but from a profound and utter control of the self. The cold mist of the mountaintop and the profound self-denial of the Yamabushi fade, and the long journey we have taken together comes to a gentle close. The sounds of our adventure, from the rustling of silk kimonos to the clang of a samurai's sword, from the delicate strumming of a shamisen to the quiet prayers of an ascetical, blend into a single, distant memory. You are no longer in a bizarre past, but in the quiet of your own room. As our final chapter closes, let's take a moment to reflect on the incredible, complex, and often bizarre world we just explored. We have spent 30 nights journeying through a world of profound contradictions. We began in the elegant, poetic world of the Heian court, where a love letter was a work of art and relationships were built on unspoken rules. From there, we were plunged into the brutal world of the samurai, where love was a matter of honor, loyalty, and duty, and where a relationship could be a strategic alliance. We walked the streets of the pleasure quarters, meeting the celebrated Oiran, the artistic Geisha, and the struggling Yujo, and we learned that for them, love and sexuality were intertwined with art, commerce, and a unique, fragile kind of dignity. We delved into the spiritual world of the Armyodo and the fox spirits, where magic and myth were used to influence affairs of the heart. And finally, we visited the world of the outcast, where a different kind of freedom existed, and the world of the ascetic, where the ultimate expression of love was its complete and total rejection. A profound and continuous thread that runs through all these stories is the constant blending of the sacred and the profane, the brutal and the beautiful. What we have learned is that in feudal Japan, the physical body and its desires were not always seen as separate from the spiritual world. The same society that performed intricate purification rituals at a Shinto shrine also created explicit woodblock prints. The same men who would die for honor in battle also engaged in tender, romantic relationships with younger male apprentices. What we initially saw as bizarre was, in fact, just a different way of navigating the complexities of human emotion, a creative and often beautiful way to express love and desire in a world full of rigid rules. So, what does this all tell us about human nature? The final, lasting question this world leaves us with is whether our own modern understanding of love and sexuality is any less bizarre. We look at a world where a geisha's love was a financial contract and a samurai's love was a matter of honor, and we are fascinated. But what would an observer from that time think of our own practices? A world where relationships are conducted on tiny, glowing screens, where the concept of soulmates is a powerful myth, and where personal identity is a constant, confusing negotiation. In a way, perhaps our normal is just as strange as their bizarre. And that, my dear listener, is the final lesson of our journey. We went looking for the most bizarre sexual practices in feudal Japan, and what we found was a mirror that shows us not just the strangeness of the past, but the incredible, chaotic, and endlessly creative nature of the human heart itself. We learned that the human desire for connection, passion, and belonging is a timeless force, and its expression is as diverse as the people who feel it. The moon is high now, and our journey is complete. It's time to let the images of warriors, poets, geishas, and ascetics fade away. Rest now, and dream of a world that was as strange and beautiful as the one we live in today.